So I thought what I wanted to do in this lecture was kind of going outside of the book and talk a little bit more of what it would look like as an example in a post Alexander the Great world in which you see Hellenization take place. Um, and so actually, I'm just going to kind of visit Egypt a little bit because you probably don't think of Egypt being related to Greek culture. And when we think about the Egyptian influence on Western civilization, um, we can talk. We've earlier talked about ancient Egypt, but Egypt under a Greek influence also becomes a player in certain aspects. So I thought what I would just do is kind of show you that. So remember that a major city is going to be established that is going to be quite literary and international, kind of like a New York um, in the ancient world, Alexandria of Egypt. Remember, there were several Alexandrias, but this one is going to be significant. And when Alexander the Great dies, Ptolemy takes over Egypt, and that's the Ptolemaic dynasty. Okay, and uh, the approach that Ptolemy had was to show respect to Egyptian religion. He ends up making Alexandria the center of the Greek world. The Alexandrian Library under the Ptolemaic dynasty is going to be the biggest library in the world until it's destroyed. It's kind of like the Google of the times. Every book that was known to be out in the world, they wanted to have in the Alexandrian Library. Okay, um, this was supposed to be a place of major learning. Um, and so um, What's interesting then is that as the Greek language flourished there was also a large Jewish community, a Hellenized Jewish community in Egypt itself. And one of the first Bible translations, some have argued the first translation of any text in its entirety, but certainly of the Bible, is called the Greek Septuagint. It's in the textbook, and it comes out of Alexandria, Egypt. So here's what's interesting. The first translation of the Bible was an African one, if you want to talk about it in terms of the continent it was on. It was Egyptian, in particular, locational wise, but in the language of the Hellenized world of Greek. And so there's a legend behind it that it was 72 scholars that put it together. Essentially, whatever the case is, Jews, many did not speak Hebrew, just as many Jews in America now don't know Hebrew. They might know a few prayers. Even then, they may not even know what they exactly mean. Um, so many American Jews have an English translation of the Bible, just like many Christians have an English translation of the Bible. And so the Greek was the language of the time as well. And so here we get together, put in the late 3rd century, this text. And so basically, this was also to be set into the Alexandrian Library. It's interesting because what's significant to this topic is that the New Testament that was written in Greek, it referred, when it quoted the Old Testament, almost in so many cases, it quotes word for word the wording that's unique to the Septuagint. Okay, so the Greek Septuagint became a fundamental text in terms of Christian thought. And in some cases, it almost is required to work properly. And here's what I mean. Well, so first of all, let me clarify something. It's not until like the 16th century that a chapter and number system in a unified way is set up within the Christian world of the Bible by I think it's a French printer named Robert Astin. And so prior to that, texts for like the Bible were a scroll, and you just had to find where you wanted to get the information. There wasn't this chapter number system that you could just go to. So that's kind of interesting, right? That's something that's going to develop later on. And so that's why these verses aren't always, they don't say, and the New Testament writer didn't say, Isaiah chapter such and such said in verse da 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 da, and here's the point we want to make to prove that Jesus is really the Messiah. Now, some modern translations have little footnotes, usually like an alphabet, that will link those for you and show you. So if you ever want to take a look at that, many modern translations of the Bible do provide that tool for you. Now, what makes this interesting, though, going back to this, is that, for instance, the Hebrew word Elohim is used in the Bible in such a wide variety of ways. It's plural, meaning God. So you could say the false Elohim. It refers to God in a plural form of excellence. God is called Elohim. Mighty ones, human beings, are actually called Elohim in Psalms 82. And then angels are sometimes referred to. So there is a verse in Psalms chapter 8, Me'at Elohim, a little lower than the Elohim. The humans were made a little lower than the Elohim. That could be translated, man was made a little lower than God. The gods, that wouldn't probably work. Or the angels. Now, the Greek Septuagint uses the word angels to interpret that reference to Elohim, which is what's used in the New Testament. But many translations in English for Psalms 8, especially the Jewish one, says man is made a little bit lower than God. So in other words, the translation concept of the Elohim meaning angels is solidified in the concept of the Septuagint. What's more problematic is that there are verses in the Greek Septuagint that only exist in that text and not in some of our oldest Hebrew manuscripts. And so what you have is the book of Hebrews in the New Testament quotes a verse from the book of Deuteronomy that in the traditional Hebrew Masoretic text doesn't exist. So it looks as if there is a quote from Daniel that doesn't exist, but it does if it's in the Greek Septuagint. What scholars have discovered is that there's actually a Hebrew manuscript that correlates with the Septuagint, but not in Palestine. So it appears that the original Bible in Hebrew, that the Alexandrians had a manuscript that was different than what they had in Palestine, which means that the actual original Hebrew was altered. Even the Samaritans have a Torah that's varies 7,000 times. So that was just a little side note of biblical knowledge and so forth. I believe that the Greek Orthodox Church still sees the Septuagint as an inspired translation because of its kind of link with the New Testament. Why did I bring this up? Because we're talking about Western civilization. We're talking about all these different cultures that are incorporated into our traditions. And the Judeo-Christian, Greco-Roman world absorbed through ancient Mesopotamian sources in the past and so on, contact with Persia, all of these things, are we seeing these things all come together, right? That's what I'm trying to really get through is, wow, look at all of these pieces of the puzzle coming in, and I hope that that's how you're getting a sense of. Last thing I want to talk about, when the Greeks come in, the Ptolemaic dynasty wants to create a religion that fuses the Greek world with the Egyptian religion and creates a unique religion that is to help control people, the Serapis cult. And he created a whole institution, a Greco-Egyptian god that was completely invented by the Ptolemies to give to the Egyptians to fuse the Greek world and the Egyptian world together and help smooth his rule. And they had a priesthood and so on. The Greeks seem to have an aversion to animal-headed gods that the Egyptians had, so Serapis ends up having more of like a Zeus-like look, but then he has many icons and different things around him that are similar to Egyptian iconography. By the way, the Serapis cult would end up spreading throughout the ancient world, and it lasted until the Christians under Theodosius would annihilate the entire sect as pagan and at the expense, as with many religions, that were not Christian later on. And we'll talk about that later as we get into the Roman periods and the rise of Christianity as a political power in Rome. But anyways, I hope you found that helpful. And now I'm going to kind of continue back on the legacy, other parts of the world, the legacy of Alexander the Great had.